Hello everyone, my name is Gabriel for hotcars.com, and today we're talking about one of AMG's most controversial new products with this, the 2021 Mercedes-AMG GLA 35. And the reason why this and other 35 models in general are seen as kind of controversial has to do with the central question of whether or not this is a true AMG model. Well, there's an AMG badge on the back of this one, and that question is kind of difficult to answer, but hopefully I'll do so in this video. So I'm going to show you all around the 35. We're going to take it out on the road. Before we do any of that, I want to make sure you guys like this video and subscribe to the channel because it helps us out a ton. Let's get into it. So let's start with the styling, because this is one of those points that kind of quickly divides everyone on whether or not they like the GLA 35 and the GLA in general. But for the 35 model, we get the larger Panamericana grille that we get in most AMG models these days. You have these nice sort of sharp headlights. They sort of make the whole front end look a little bit more aggressive. Because remember, this is still a tiny sort of crossover. So if you really want to sort of make it stand out, you're going to have to do that from a styling standpoint. And I think this front end does. You have these sort of nice sort of stylistic design down here. Now in the 45 models, these are actually open vents, but in the 35, it's more of a plastic trim. But again, it's all sort of for overall design. As far as the front end alone goes, this is significantly more aggressive than a standard GLA 250, and I think it really does work well to separate the AMG versus the non-AMG model. Now, when looking at the sides of the GLA 35, there are a couple of things that I think are worth pointing out, starting with these wheels, because these are 20-inch optional AMG wheels. Now, as standard, you get 19-inch, but these have a nice 5-spoke design, sort of very traditional AMG, and you also get a little turbo badge here on the side. It doesn't say AMG, but again, it's just a bit of a smaller touch to let you know that you're in something a bit special. Now, looking down the sides of the GLA 35, you're not gonna notice a lot of harsh lines or very sort of aggressive design. And for me, this is kind of one of those points where I'm not entirely sold on. I feel like if it is gonna wear the AMG badge, it should be a little bit spicier, perhaps a little bit more aggressive than the standard GLA model, but everything down the side here looks pretty standard GLA. Overall, not super over the top aggressive. So again, this is kind of a bit more of a low-key kind of model. Again, I'm not totally sold on it, but if you want something that is quick but doesn't look too over the top, then the 35 is probably the way to go. So I think it's worth talking about the crossover-sized elephant in the room with the GLA 35, because this is a second generation GLA. Now, the first time around, there was only a 45 model, and that was much more of a sort of hot hatch. It was much closer to a hatch. It was a little shorter, a little lower to the ground. This second gen GLA overall, not just the 35 and the 45 and the standard GLA, all of them are a little bit more crossover-like. Now, this is clearly a crossover. It's definitely sort of leaving its hatchback roots in the past. Now, I imagine that is done because in other markets, you can get the A-Class hatchback in a 35 and in a 45 form, but in the United States, because Americans don't buy hatchbacks, we're only stuck with the GLA. Now, if you want a crossover, the extra space of a crossover, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but as we'll talk in a little bit, that does come at a cost in the sort of driving dynamics aspect of this equation. Now, the added benefit of this becoming a crossover, as you might expect, is that there's more space back here. And the rear row of seats, you can fold them to fit a ton of stuff. So I could definitely see the argument that if you need to have one vehicle that does it all, rather than having a sporty vehicle and a daily driver kind of vehicle, then the GLA 35 and both the 45 model should offer you more than enough space for you to live your life very comfortably, but also have a little bit of performance whenever you want to. So let's talk about one of these centers of the AMG versus non-AMG controversies with this engine, because under the hood lives a turbocharged 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. Now, total power output is 302 horsepower and 295 pounds-feet of torque. Now, all of that power goes to all 4 wheels via an 8-speed dual-clutch automatic transmission, which is a major highlight. I'll talk about that more once we get on the road. But major differences between this 35 and the 45 is that this engine isn't a hand-built engine like you get in the more expensive 45 models. Now, Mercedes calls this the AMG Enhanced engine, but again, it isn't an all-out AMG platform. So technically not an AMG, but it's still a heck of an engine, because as you'll see when we go driving, it delivers a ton of torque, a lot of usable power, especially around town. Now, as we move over to this vehicle's interior, there's a couple of things you're going to notice. Namely, our particular tester is finished in night black exterior with a Neva gray and black interior. Now, for the GLA 35, genuine leather is an optional extra. You'll have to pay up more for that, but this particular tester has a sort of leather-like textured material. Overall, it feels fairly close to real leather. During my time with it, I didn't find myself wanting a higher quality material. In terms of the seats themselves, the finishing, the quality of the material is fairly good. Now, in terms of interior materials, you're going to be surprised at the amount of plastic throughout this cabin, albeit it is disguised in a nice gloss black finish, and you get those stunning air vents that you get in a lot of Mercedes models. But all in all, it's still a Mercedes. It's still nicely put together, no squeaks, no rattles, that sort of thing. But there is a lot of plastic. But I really do appreciate the fact that they've gone the extra mile to try to disguise them, even though this is kind of on the lower end of both the AMG models and Mercedes lineup as well. This is one of the more affordable models. Now, in terms of the interior, you get the same 10.25-inch dual screens as you get in the A-Class, the GLA, the GLB, and the CLA. Now, again, these two, I've said it before in my CLA review, these are probably one of the best sort of screen combinations in the entire auto industry, and I like the fact that you get this similar design in the more expensive and larger AMG and Mercedes models. They're very, very high quality. The colors match beautifully, and the fact that they're held in the same bezel almost makes it look like one enormous screen. Now, as you'd expect, this is MBUX, Mercedes' very excellent infotainment system, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, all of that. You get that. There's space for your phone here. There's USB-C connectivity throughout. This particular vehicle is equipped with navigation. I like the fact that it is a very wide screen. It takes a good use of the available space. Now, even though this does have CarPlay and Android Auto, I haven't really been using that. I find that Mercedes' system is very intuitive, very easy to use, and overall, this has kind of been my go-to over the last week or so with the GLA. So now we're behind the wheel of the 2021 GLA 35, and I thought we could start with one of my favorite parts about this AMG variant, and that is launch control. So I have a little dial on the steering wheel. I'm going to turn that over to Sport Plus, which puts it in its sportiest setting. From there, really simple. Foot on the brake, foot on the gas. It's going to rev up, hold those revs, so when I release the brake, it's going to launch as hard as possible. Ready? It's crazy. It's crazy that even though this isn't, you know, a 45 model, it still launches so freaking hard. And I think that is probably the biggest compliment, the biggest takeaway that I've gotten over my week with this 35, because I can definitely understand the question of, is this a true AMG? And, you know, as we talked about earlier with the engine, okay, you're not getting a hand-built engine, and that is a bummer, which technically doesn't make it a true AMG product. But the way in which it delivers its power, even if it is an AMG enhanced engine, it still is plenty powerful. So quick recap: 302 horsepower, 295 pounds-feet of torque, but the superstar in this entire equation is the transmission, because you still get the dual clutch 8-speed automatic, which is pretty much what really counts in this scenario. Because don't let the figures on paper of 300 horsepower fool you. The way in which the transmission makes use of that power and how quickly it shifts, it makes this car feel more powerful than the figures alone might suggest. Now, that's exactly what I found with the 45 model that had 382 horsepower, but that car easily felt like it had over 400 horsepower. In this case, even though it does have 300 horsepower, it feels, you know, maybe perhaps a little closer to 350. Now, as you saw from that launch, having the different driving modes unlocks little features, and it changes the driving characteristics of the GLA 35. Now, in a lot of cars that I've driven, switching between various modes like Sport Plus or Sport doesn't really make a huge difference, but it does in the 35. And Now, I've been driving this over about a week or so in a crowded city with terrible roads and bumpy everything. And in Sport Plus, the suspension is very, very stiff. Now, the best part about it is that you do have adaptive suspension. So if you move into the softer modes, like I'm gonna go from Sport Plus down into Sport, and then you have Comfort. Now, Comfort, as the kind of name suggests, it really does soften things up a little bit. Not by a long shot, because even in Comfort mode, this thing is still on the stiffer side. Now, our particular tester has these sort of standard seats. Now, you can get sportier seats in this thing. I probably wouldn't. I think these seats, even though they are the standard one, let's take some little corner action here. Yeah, it's all about that powertrain. So even though you can get sportier and stiffer seats, I absolutely wouldn't, because even though these are sort of the standard seats, they're comfortable, but they're borderline not. They're borderline a little bit too stiff. I personally haven't been able to get super duper comfortable in them myself. But I wouldn't opt for anything sportier if it's gonna make it stiffer. Now, additionally, in the GLA 35, you don't get genuine leather as standard. Now this car does have a combination of the sort of white and black, almost cookies and cream kind of look. But again, it is a sort of textured material, which isn't leather. Genuine leather is an optional extra. I don't think I would opt for that, to be honest. This material, even though it's not real leather, it feels just fine to me. It feels high quality enough. I don't really see the reason to. So for me personally, the only way I could make a case for the 35 is practically if I'm going to get, just powertrain focused options. I'm not gonna try to load this car up, because at that point, I'd rather go for a 45. You get the hand-built engine, you get more power, etc., etc. Now, one added benefit about grabbing a 35 instead of a 45 is that there aren't too many visual differences between them. Even if you put them side by side, it's very difficult to tell which one is the 35 and which one is the 45. Now, in terms of exterior options, this particular little crossover has one that I would probably skip out on as well, and those are the 20-inch, the upgraded wheels, and that's because they're an inch larger than the stock ones. So for me personally, I would downsize the wheels, just get the standard ones. You save on options because you don't have to, you get them as standard, which is a plus, and you also improve your ride in the process. Now, if it's all about aesthetics, then go for it, because these are some nice wheels, but overall, in terms of like daily drivability, I would opt for the standard ones. Now, in terms of handling, I've been pretty surprised with how agile the actual steering is in this GLA 35. It understeers a little bit, but again, that's kind of to be expected with a front-wheel drive biased platform. Remember, this is all-wheel drive, but it is front-wheel drive biased. So that's kind of to be expected, but around town, having such a torquey engine that kind of delivers a lot of power with a dual clutch transmission, it really is quite fun to drive even at lower speeds. Is it a true AMG? I mean, by definition it isn't, because of the lack of the hand-built engine and some of the drama, but I think for most people, this is dramatic enough. And even as you saw with that launch control clip, the acceleration, the way that the whole thing kind of just sort of kicks you in the back and goes, is quick enough. And for me, it's actually still pretty surprisingly fast. So there we have it, the 2021 Mercedes-AMG GLA 35. Now, is it a true AMG? In short, no, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because there's a lot to like here. Now, you're not getting that hand-built engine under the hood, but the powertrain is still easily the best part of this little crossover, because the way the engine is very torquey and very powerful, the way the transmission is just absolutely seamlessly quick, is probably the best part about the 35. Now, in terms of differences between a 35 and a 45, the 45 isn't going to sort of redefine what this is from a visual or a performance standpoint. Just think of it as you're getting more. Now, is that more worth the extra price? In my book, probably, because even though this is really good, that 45 is great. So for me, I think if you're looking for a daily driver that's sort of a traffic carving, torquey, quick vehicle for a city, the 35 is more than enough. You don't need the 45, but if you have big highways and you can really stretch out that power, then it's worth going for the 45. And I think the final point I want to drive home is that if you like the powertrain, you like the way this drives, the way it feels, You don't have to have it in this exact form factor because you can still get it in the A-Class, the CLA, the GLB, and the GLA. So you can kind of pick and choose where you want this powertrain. I think for me, my favorite that I've driven so far is still that CLA. But again, if you want more space, you want a hot crossover, the GLA and the GLB are both available. And with that, I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure you guys like and subscribe because it helps us out a ton, and I'll see you again really soon.